morning, good afternoon, good evening all, it's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid. A channel I've created not only to bring awareness and understanding to the realities of complex trauma, but I really want to delve into ways of healing and improving the quality of all of your lives. Now this is the next video in the adoption series. And what I want to talk about today has been raised by a trend that I've seen appearing on some social media platforms of mixed race adoption, to where the adoptee is of a different race or nationality to the adoptive parents, and the difficulties that that raises, and the buttons that it pushes, because I know they go through cycles of trends, particularly when you're looking at movie stars and all that. You know, before they were going out and adopting babies from Africa, then they were going out and adopting babies from China and so forth and so forth. And it creates these trends that go through. And there's all these wonderful words around my intentions for doing this. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions, especially when you're looking down this path of adoption, because of one simple component. When you are a different nationality, when you look completely different to those who are raising you, you are reminded every moment of every day that you are separate. You have to go through these reinforcement processes that you were part of. And this feeds into the fog, this feeds into the survival state. And you also constantly have to explain why you don't look like them. Going from the severity you have in preschools and primary schools when, kids aren't subtle. And they get cruel with their questionings and how things are put. And as you progressively get older and older, the questions can become more invasive. And it is a constant reminder that you are not biologically theirs. As I said in the title, you can have the best of intentions. I'm saving this kid from a war zone. Awesome. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's all good. But it doesn't change the reality. And there is really nothing you can do to change that reality. That when a child is a different nationality to those who are raising them, that separation is always going to be present. The more you try to pretend that it isn't, that it doesn't exist, the more you are going to suppress it and push it into the background and actually negatively reinforce it. But also, if you go over the top with trying to convince, the same thing happens. Ultimately, children will always blame themselves. We will always make it our fault of why things happen. And then as we get older, we try to process that our fault into who we can actually blame. But when it comes down to it, in our core, something was wrong with us. The reason why our mother didn't pick us up in the box and take us home and welcome us as part of our family is our fault. And yes, cognitively we can have all these justifications and explanations, and aggressively we can argue and do all these sorts of stuff. But in the darkest of dark nights, we blame ourselves. And I've seen it play out so often. Because here in Australia, we have, from the Vietnam War, a hell of a lot of the mixed race babies out of Vietnam ended up here. Operation Baby Lift. Australia was one of the primary grounds. And that's actually how I was part of that process, or linked to that process. That was a pathway that I got adopted out in Australia. It's quite prevalent over here. And I've seen it in front of me play out all the time in the different states. I've seen a completely Asian adoptee absolutely viscerally hate Asians. Not because of the indoctrination of what they were raised, it's because of trying to make sense of, which as I've said in other videos, of what do I need to be to be part of this family? What do I need to change to be part of this family? And because of being that different nationality, that's an obstacle. I have to hate that. And ultimately, it's hating, a large component of yourself. There's this part of that separation and that negative reinforcement. But then there's another part that is extremely challenging. And that's down the road when you're an adult and you start to look at exploring who you are and your nationalities, the biological nationality you come from. Especially when you're, from an indigenous background or a different, a color background, a non-white background. It becomes more important in those aspects because society throws these questions at you all the time. And you have to try to answer them at some point. No matter what you do, you're never going to be accepted into your race because you grew up in a race outside of that. And that is never more prevalent than when you're looking at indigenous. Especially where you are like myself on what they refer to as white passing, because both my biological parents were mixed. In the journeys I've done back home and trying to connect to family, you were treated more of an outsider than non-natives. And that reinforces your separation from not only your biological family and your race and your adoptive family, but also your species. And this is again the road to hell with good intentions, because religious organizations chose to take a hell of a lot of mixed race kids and farm them out all over the world, with all these wondrous justifications if it's for their own good, saving them from abuse and poverty and blah, 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 blah. Society doesn't understand it. And there is literally nowhere for any of us to go to find any sense of belonging. Like I've gotten on a plane numerous times and gone to the US and in Canada. I stayed over there and lived over there for quite a while, especially in Canada, trying to find connections and create the connections I needed to be able to trace family and to find that understanding of culture and belonging. And it got to the point where I hated myself to the degree of self-harm because I knew that there was nothing that I could ever do to be good enough to be part of them. I don't fit in the Western society. I don't fit in white society. I don't fit in indigenous. What nationality am I? I don't have a nationality. That's why on this component, this channel, I'm just Bear. I'm just this person. Yeah, I'm a practitioner and a therapist, and I know that this sounds bad, but this is the reality created for me. And I know so many other mixed race indigenous people that are in exactly the same position as myself. Not just from First Nations in America and Canada, but also here in Australia between Aboriginal and Islander Maori, African and, the different African tribal nations. I know a few. I know a Somali woman that, she had years ago, she had a lot of difficulty in trying to get back home. And a lot from Vietnam, especially Vietnam, that have gone back to try to find family. And because they were raised here in Australia and they were a product of a war, there's just this layer of you don't fit or belong anywhere. That is a part of this road to hell is paved with good intentions thing. And as I said, this video was triggered by a trend that I'm seeing on social media where they're going, so what is wrong with a white family raising a black baby? This is what's wrong with it. I don't care what your good intentions are. You are going to harm that infant, that child, because you are of a different race. You are not going to understand their epigenetic predispositions to certain things because they're not yours. And you're furthering the reality of separation. And there is nothing you can do to change it. As sad and as hard as this is to say, as confronting as it is to say, when you were raised outside of your culture in a family that's not your biological race, there is no way of fixing it. Because the sheer scale of what needs to change to be able to fix it. And we carry that burden. And this isolation affects our relationships. It affects how we feel about ourselves and how we engage with the world. And it does an immeasurable amount of harm. And it's our fault. Because no one else sees what they are doing as wrong. And this is why, like, it tripped me out when I started seeing all these things appearing on social media about it. I just went, putting aside the reality of it's turning into this trend that's being a joke, the harm that it does, and how objectified we become because we are fulfilling that purpose. If I'm a great person, I took this other kid from another race and I'm fixing them. Yeah, it's a triggering thing, and yeah, it's really bothering me. And I'm trying to stay on subject here. But understand that so much goes on in the background when we are trying to be part of. The fog is such a huge component of every facet of our existence as an adoptee. Its nuances play out in the minutiae of what we see and feel separates us from the family we're trying to fit in and be part of, and the society we're trying to be part of as a member of that family. That this just adds an impossible to avoid layer that requires constant justification and constant explanation. I either have to constantly answer the question of, well, how, are you Native? Yes, both my parents are mixed. Sorry, blah, 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 blah. How did you end up? I have to go into this whole rigmarole to justify my existence in me trying to sit as a member of my own person and my own culture and my own spirituality, even though I can't find where I belong. Every day and every time I go out into the world. And that's faced by the majority of those that are raised outside of their race through adoption. Please keep this in mind. And if you come across these posts on social media, please understand what it does to us, especially adoptees like myself who are aware of it. Please be kind and gentle. Please be respectful. And I'll see you next time. Hope.